Hello, everyone. I am Florence Powdermaker, and I'm not just going to be telling my story today. I'm going to be telling the story of my beloved sister, Hortense. Well, there were a lot of different sisters in town, some of them quite well known. There were the Mulvaney sisters. They were great teachers. There were the Gabor sisters. They didn't live here, but they came here all the time to visit their famous mother. And then, of course, there were the Powdermaker sisters. Now you're going to say, well, what are you famous for? Well, back in the late 1800s and 1900s, there were not a lot of women doctors. I had a doctorate in medicine and also in psychiatry. And I made a lot of inroads, a lot of differences in these two areas. Now, my sister Hortense, she had her doctorate in anthropology and made great strides there. And what is our link to Ridgefield? Well, we lived here for about 30 years. We bought this beautiful 103-acre farm almost on the border of Danbury, up there in Ridgebury. And the end of the 1960s, we weren't doing well. We had to sell. We sold it to a developer, and he put in a road. Guess what he called the road? The Powdermaker Road. So we were very proud of that. But what is the beginning of our story? The beginning of our story is so important. Minnie and Louis were our parents. They were German Jews. They had to escape because of the Holocaust. Anyone who had parents who have been through any aspect of the Holocaust have been changed forever. This was such a traumatic time in their lives, and also our lives as well. They came to Philadelphia. We were four. There were two brothers, two sisters. I was closest to Florence. We were not a wealthy family at all. Went to just Western normal high school in Philadelphia, and my sister and I worked in a shirt factory. The money we made, we had to give back to our parents. There were a lot of demands on us. We had to be special. We had to be dedicated. We had to have a doctorate degree. We should be medical doctors. And we always wondered, why did we have these pressures that other students in our school did not have? But we basically did what our parents told us. Well, I went off and I went to college at Johns Hopkins. I couldn't have gone to a better medical school, but I really wasn't interested in being a medical doctor. I had gotten there on a full scholarship. I wanted to get a doctorate in psychiatry. That's what I was interested in. I got a Rockefeller fellowship to study at the University of Chicago so that I could get the doctorate that I wanted. Oh, this is the field I wanted to be in. I could still use my medical degree. There's all sorts of medications that are necessary for therapy. Well, while I was getting my doctorate, I began to do my research and my therapy on World War I, the trauma, the Holocaust, the Germans, what had happened to the people, the isolation, why they were changed forever. This came from my background. I needed to discover. Well, when it came World War II, the Japanese called me over because of my research and my work in my therapies to help them as well. And I was really start of the movement where the traumatic, the distress syndrome that was so prevalent after veterans, after war, after families were destroyed, this was my area of study. I needed to do things for the people that had TDS syndrome. This was so important. Well, after I worked with the World War I research and people I worked with, World War II, I extended and I began working with prisoners of war, people who were interrogated, people who also were families of those that have gone through this, people who were acting as spies and intelligence. I really feel I did a lot for this community, and it helped me better understand myself as well. Well, what did I do with therapy that was very different? Well, back in the early 1900s, there was a stigma against therapy. Oh, you know, you're going for therapy. And if there was therapy, it was one-on-one. No, I believed also, in addition to one-on-one, group therapy. Oh, this was very controversial at the time. And you don't just sit in a group and talk. It's a process. You have to learn the process. There's orientation. There's building a climate. There's rules and regulation, the asking of questions, the gathering of materials, the synthesizing what you are learning, the application, the peaks and the valleys of the therapy. I also felt role playing. I was the first one to say role playing was important. No one is forced into role playing, but those who want to, the others can watch, they can learn from this role playing. I also had everyone journaling. People were not journaling then. You look back at your journals and you see patterns. You can take your journal, you can read an excerpt, you can share with the group. Some people I found need art therapy. They can't talk about it, they can't write about it. They can draw it. It is so amazing what their drawings show. There is dance therapy, there is music therapy. I brought all these together for the victims of isolation and trauma and being victims of the war. There's one other thing that I am very, very proud of that I did, and that is I wrote a Bible, which it was called On Parenting. I did not do this alone. I did this with Jerome Franks, and people said, how can you write about parenting, Florence? You've never had any kids of your own. Oh, I worked with so many families that were in trauma of all different types. I worked with normal children in my practice as well. And I was not happy with just Dr. Spock for everybody. Oh, he had developmental levels, but only for people who were in preschool. What about the rest of children's lives? At that time, therapy also was very different. It was you were very strict and regimented and disciplined, or you were the free spirit. You were given what you wanted, you expressed yourself. Jerome and I said, no, from our research and our work with thousands of families, we found, first of all, children needed safety, security, trust, a nurturing, comfortable, warm climate. But on the other hand, they needed rules, they needed discipline, they needed boundaries. They needed to be responsible. They needed consequences. There was a balance like anything else in life. I was so proud of this book. Some people still refer to this book today. So I felt for the early 1900s, I left a very, very strong legacy in parenting, and working with trauma, particularly related to war, and in involving people in multiple types of therapy. My sister Hortense was younger, more social, much more outgoing, and much more stubborn than I was. She was also not going to have any type of a desk job. She told my parents, yes, I am going to get my doctorate, but I am going to get it in what I want to get it in, and I'm going to have to look around. She graduated from Western High School in Philly, got full scholarships wherever she went. She also worked in the factory with me, and she actually did research later on labor unions in factories. She decided to go to a girls' school called Goucher. She really liked it there. And while at Goucher, she began to hear lectures from Margaret Mead. Well, Margaret Mead could motivate anyone to go into the field of anthropology. Hortense thought, this is the field for me. I love to travel. I love cultures. I want to learn about people. Again, I want to learn about my own Jewish heritage. Well, after Goucher, many people seemed to mention to her the London School of Economics. And there was this amazing Polish psychiatrist and anthropologist there, Dr. Branislaw Malinowski. They said, you've got to study under him. He is the best. So she went to London to the School of Economics, and it was the right choice. She learned so much under his tutelage. She ended up getting her doctorate there, and she ended up teaching there for quite a while. Well, for her doctorate research, she decided to go with the Lassu tribe in New Ireland and Papua New Guinea. This was a tribal group that nobody had ever researched before. And she was looking at their religion, their location globally, their government, their history, their values, their family units. There were so many aspects that she needed to look at these groups to determine why they were the way they were. She also looked at why they were changing, because each of these native tribes were beginning to change. She then shifted gears and she went to Africa. She went to Zambia, Northern Rhodesia, Cape Town, whole different cultures, each one distinct, even though some of them neighbored on one another. She looked at her different aspects and began to draw conclusions for the very first time. She also began to look at people who had lived through natural disasters and how their cultures changed after natural disasters, earthquakes, volcanoes, fires. All of these things made such a difference to people's cultures. And then she came home and she decided, I must discover more about my own culture, why I was brought up the way I was, why this is continuing, why it isn't continuing, how people live through this trauma. And at this point, she came to me, and we dovetailed our research on the Jewish culture, where it was coming from and where it was going. At this point, my sister said, I'm looking at alienated cultures. It was after the Civil War. People were looking at civil rights. She wanted to look at the Black culture, slavery, non-slavery, intermarriage, that, and she went to a little town called Indianola, Mississippi. Mostly a Black community, very, very poor, some white people. Oh, the aspects she studied. She lived with them. She ate with them. She really got into their souls and learned so much about their particular culture. And then, of course, what was left? The Native American culture. She went out to Montana. And after looking at the three very and alienated cultures. She began to draw comparisons and gain new insight into them. Well, the next cultural study that she did was quite unique, but again, it was from her background. We had spent so much time working in the shirt factory in Philly. She decided to look at the culture of unions, the culture of non-unions, the union leaders, the company owners, the families of these people, how they changed the culture of the town. Fascinating study, still looked at by labor unions today. Her last two big studies were very interesting right here in the United States and California. She always wondered why there was such a radical element at Berkeley University. There were universities all over the United States, but the most reactionary, the most protest, most that was going on verbally and making changes came out of Berkeley, California. Why was this? She decided, I'm even going to teach there for a while because then I'm going to better understand the culture of Berkeley and radicalism. While she was in California, she said, look, everybody has always been interested in Hollywood, the culture of Hollywood, the dream factory. Do dreams really come true here? What is it like to be maybe a not so famous, not so wealthy person growing up in Hollywood? Do people want to stay in Hollywood? Do they move out of Hollywood? What draws them there? What do they do with the after effects of Hollywood? Oh, it was such a fascinating study and is still read today. The last book of my sister's became a textbook. It was her autobiography. It was called Stranger and Friend. It was about field work. It was about being an anthropologist, what it is like, the problems you have to solve. It is so readable. It is so down to earth. Stranger and Friend, if you're interested in anthropology. Well, while my sister, was doing, all of this research, lecturing all over, writing these books, she was busy teaching. 30 years she taught at Queens College. She started the anthropology department at Queens. She received a distinguished award for a professor at Queens College. She also taught at Yale. She also, as I said, taught at the London School of Economics. And she got an honorary degree from Goucher, and that would have made my parents very, very happy. She was also highly esteemed as head of the Anthropology Society, president for so many years. She left such a legacy. You know, I was so proud of the fact that my sister and I, we worked in disciplines that interacted. We helped so many different people. Individually and together, we help doctors, we help nurses, pastors, social workers, teachers, psychologists, counselors. So many people really relied on us in our work back in the early 1900s. And I'm also proud that in Ridgefield, we made a name for ourselves, such a name that there is a drive named after us. And as I said, Powderhorn Drive, Powdermaker Drive in Ridgefield. It is now called Pleasant View Estates. It was all one piece of land at one time, but now 2-acre zoning. So if you ever just happen to be driving around, come by this, say, wait a minute, I know why that street got the name. That street got the name because of those two doctors who were so ahead of that time and brought so much in psychiatry and anthropology to the forefront. Thank you.